Welcome back to another episode of That's Business. Today's guest, Erin Nghe, is a licensed clinical social worker and OCD specialist based out of the metro Atlanta area. She is the clinical director and owner of OCD Set, an interactive mental health treatment facility that supports individuals living with obsessive compulsive disorder and related disorders. Erin, I'm so excited to have this conversation because we are at a very special week. We're in OCD Awareness Week. So,
yes.
Starting off, tell us, what is OCD Awareness Week?
So OCD Awareness Week is all about raising awareness for obsessive compulsive disorder. This year, it takes place October 12th through the 18th, and OCD treatment providers and even individuals living with the diagnosis spend a considerable amount of time hosting awareness events and having different social media campaigns to educate the public about effective treatments and the support that's available. But it's also about reducing the stigma associated with OCD. And so I'm just so excited to be here during this special week. Thank you for having me. I've been following the podcast and just really grateful to meet you. I've heard great things about you.
Likewise. First of all, your business name, I think, is one of my top 5 favorite, OCD Set Free. So light and loving. But how did you decide that you wanted to specialize in OCD, or at what point in your career professional development did you decide, hey, this is what I want to specialize in?
I did not decide that.
Oh.
The population decided for me. The community decided for me. Individuals living with the diagnosis, they unfortunately suffer extensively from the diagnosis, and it ended up falling in my lap being able to work with this community. I actually had been living in Peru at the time when I first discovered a clinic that was specialized in OCD, and, just did lots and lots of research about this clinic. At the time, they actually were doing an extensive amount of work on race-based trauma, so connecting racism, microaggressions, and discrimination to PTSD. And I initially reached out to the psychologist at this clinic to get more information about that. And then she said, well, I also specialize in OCD. At the time, I was really interested in working with her. And eventually, after interviewing with her and just meeting her, she asked, would you also be interested in learning about OCD? And, as a mental health professional, I was completely open to it, but just eventually left Peru, went back to my home base in Atlanta, and then went to Kentucky where the clinic was, and just was blown away at how effective the treatment was for obsessive compulsive disorder. And so the gold standard treatment, evidence-based treatment for OCD is called exposure and ritual prevention therapy. You might also hear exposure and response prevention therapy, or EXRP or ERP. And so people were flying in from all over the world to come to this psychologist clinic, and they were getting better so quickly. It felt like magic. It obviously is not magic. It's just evidence-based treatment. But I just realized that I had to work with this community. It was such meaningful work to see people reclaim their lives and not be debilitated as they typically were when they entered our clinic. So
now, what were some of these successful outcomes? Because I feel there's just so much just like assumptions and just wrong information in the world about what someone with OCD has, or the classic saying of, oh, I'm sorry, it's my OCD, for people that don't clinically have OCD, I'm sure, which drives you crazy. But what do some of these successful outcomes look like in this clinic?
First, I think we have to really talk about what OCD actually is in the first place, because there's so many misconceptions around what it actually is. OCD is what we call ego dystonic thoughts. It is a disorder, and it's when a person has intrusive thoughts that are coming into their minds against their will. So when we say ego dystonic, that means that the thoughts are not in line with a person's values. And so essentially, the person has these intrusive thoughts about things happening to themselves or to their loved ones that are not in line with who they actually are. And in order to get rid of these intrusive thoughts, they end up engaging in behaviors, what we know to be compulsions. And so those compulsions do actually give the individual temporary relief, but it doesn't provide the individual with long-lasting relief. And so I like to first start out with the definition and just kind of educate the public, because oftentimes people believe that OCD is just counting. Maybe you've seen stereotypical things, television shows like Monk depicting having this disorder in a humorous way. But for those that came into the clinic where I trained, they were in fetal position crying on the floor because of how scary their thoughts were. And so when you talk about treatment outcomes, by the time they completed the protocol for exposure and response prevention therapy, they were actually able to reclaim their lives. They were not crying and running away from the things that they initially came in to see us for. And it's really unbelievable. Sometimes when I am first meeting my clients, I teach them about the OCD cycle. So it's when a person has an obsession, then they have anxiety. That anxiety causes them to want to do a compulsion, and then they get this temporary relief. But the act of doing a compulsion then causes them to have intrusive thoughts or obsessions again, and they end right back up in that cycle. Well, some of my clients who do actually have contamination OCD, they are spending an exorbitant amount of money on soap and paper towels. They're spending 4 to 8 hours in the shower in order to be clean. And it is based off of an unreasonable amount of fear, and it is based off of intrusive thoughts that are not accurate. It's definitely distorted thinking. And so when we talk about the outcomes, they're no longer spending money on things that they don't need. They're able to return to work. They're able to, take care of their finances, honor their finances. They're able to adequately take care of their bodies in a healthy, realistic way, and just ultimately do the things that create a lot of meaning for them.
Now, of course, it depends case by case, and it's not a one size fits all, but what are some of the typical behaviors that you see in patients that do have OCD, or maybe that people can look out for?
Yes. It's going to depend on the type of OCD that they actually have. To talk about the taboo types of OCD, or the types of OCD that are not very common, there's relationship OCD, religious scrupulosity OCD. There is actually even harm OCD, where a person is afraid that they will just somehow wake up and spontaneously snap and harm their loved one or hit a pedestrian. And again, we used that word ego dystonic earlier. So they don't want to break up with their spouse if they have relationship OCD. It's that these intrusive thoughts are causing them to have questions about whether the relationship is healthy, or whether they actually did harm their loved one, or whether they will harm themselves. There is such a thing as suicide OCD, which is very different from having suicide thoughts from depression. And so when you talk about the signs, oftentimes there is a lot of avoidance of anything related to the thing that creates fear for them. So if a person is afraid that they will accidentally hit a pedestrian, this person may avoid driving. They may appear to just have a driving phobia. If a person is afraid that they're going to just snap and stab a loved one, they might avoid cutting up their foods or helping their loved one cook. And so lots of avoidance, sometimes reassurance seeking. There's even mental compulsions. And so that's when a person is overthinking, engaged in rumination, overanalysis inside their minds. And so they may not seem very present, or they're constantly worrying and asking the same questions over and over and over to make sure that the thing that they are worried about will not actually happen. And so those are a few signs that someone may be struggling.
I did not realize how many different forms of OCD there are. I knew some of them.
Oh, and that doesn't even scratch the surface. That doesn't even scratch the surface. And really, it's just that OCD is going to latch on to whatever the person cares about. So there are these different subtypes and categories. But if you just think about, okay, well, what does this person love? If this person really loves their puppy, I actually do have people that are afraid that they might harm their puppy. And so they do a lot of compulsions around their animals. I have some people whose compulsions are social justice oriented. And so they may hoard animals. I have some people that are afraid of being racist. And so they are not racist. They just avoid BIPOC individuals because they are afraid that their brain is just going to make them say something that is racist, even though that's not who they are. So OCD can latch on to anything.
I did not even realize that. That's, not great in the sense, but great at the education you are providing for this. What does this look like? I know we have something kind of in the works of continuous education for therapists wanting to specialize in OCD, but tell us all about this.
Yes, we are just really excited here at OCD Set Free. Underneath the umbrella of OCD Set Free is an initiative. It's a networking membership association for BIPOC clinicians who are interested in specializing in OCD and BIPOC individuals with lived experience to have a supportive community where they can connect with those that actually understand the intersectionality of being BIPOC and actually having OCD. And so through this initiative, ERP Kaleidoscope, we're so excited that during OCD week, we can officially announce that we are continuing education sponsors for the APA and through ACE, which allows social workers and psychologists to obtain continuing education credits. And we've just been working very hard behind the scenes. ERP Kaleidoscope launched last year. We had a grand opening during OCD week. And so a year later to just be able to shout this from the rooftops is so exciting. And we cannot wait to train clinicians and really just continue to offer such a supportive environment.
First of all, this is absolutely incredible. Obviously, there's a need. We need more therapists. Mm-hmm. We need more people in the world that do the Lord's work for what you do. But how did this idea come to fruition of just the support network and then realizing, hey, I think we should train other clinicians and therapists to do this work, specializing in OCD?
Yeah, there's just so few clinicians nationally that actually specialize in OCD. I actually have clients from around the world that reach out to me. I just did a consultation with a prospective client in Australia yesterday. I just had somebody in Greece reach out to me last week. I have people from Pakistan, India, like just various countries that reach out to me. They find our social media page online and they have such limited resources in their countries. And similarly, we have limited resources here in the United States, but internationally, they have even fewer resources. And so we're starting small. We obviously hope to be able to support folks internationally, in the future as well. But just realize that for BIPOC individuals, it's very difficult to get access to resources. It can take 10, 14, 17 years to get an accurate diagnosis and treatment for OCD when it is one of the most treatable diagnoses. And that's such a disheartening stat that is out there. But for BIPOC folks, we believe that it may take even longer because there is so much stigma associated, right? So think about a BIPOC individual going to their therapist and saying, hey, I'm having harm thoughts. There may not always be safety. There is often fear of whether there will be consequences to articulating something like that, even though they don't actually want to harm anybody. They're just having these ego dystonic intrusive thoughts. That's where ERP Kaleidoscope was just imagined, and we have been working hard at it. So we're excited.
Okay, I'm sorry, 10 to 14. Can we talk about that stat real quick? Is this across the board? Is this more for BIPOC communities?
No, it's across the board. It's across the board. And so that's what I'm saying. We believe that for BIPOC individuals, it may be longer. Yeah.
Not that we want to talk ill of our certain healthcare systems and all, but why do you feel that it takes, I can't fathom, 10 years on the low end to get a diagnosis? What are some of those areas outside of the example you just provided of why you think these diagnoses take so long?
That's a really great question. I think it's just that, not just.
We can have a whole podcast just on that, right?
Yes, there are so many factors. I honestly believe that this week that we are here honoring, OCD Awareness Week really is about reducing that stigma and just highlighting that OCD is not an adjective. And I think in part it's because people believe that it is a quirk and they don't really understand the seriousness of it when they see it in their loved ones. I also believe that because of the stigma, people don't report on the lived experience side that they're having these symptoms. But then when you talk about on the clinician side, honestly, I believe that clinicians are just not being trained early enough. I'm so thankful for my training, and it's not training that I got in graduate school. It was postgraduate training that I received, and I sought it out myself. And so when you think about graduate school and how many diagnoses they have to cover, they only have so much time to go over one diagnosis. And so I just think, there needs to be more specialized training in graduate programs at all levels. So not just doctoral level, but even at the master's level.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking back to what everyone has to take at Psych 100 class. Maybe let's not just say this is bipolar disorder. Maybe we just give a little more detail than just the basic definition. I don't know. Or I'm sorry,
Correct.
Not bipolar, OCD, I should say. But, this is what OCD looks like, and it doesn't help in the media and everything of the poor display of those things. So I'm sure you get extra irritated every day of people saying those things.
Absolutely. I was at an OCD conference a few years back, and there were, how women's restrooms are. There were probably 15 of us in line.
Yep.
Waiting for 3 stalls, and someone in front of me, 2 women in front of me asked me, hey, like, what are you here for? And I said, I am here for the obsessive compulsive disorder conference. And they were like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. I have OCD. And I was really mortified because they said it like it was, this really exciting diagnosis to have. And I was actually quite stunned in the moment. I probably didn't correct, the interaction the way that I could have, because I was like, oh my gosh, there are probably people in the stalls listening to this conversation. And this just so happens to be a conference where individuals with lived experience also attend it with the professionals. And so I was mortified in the moment, but I really do think that people just think it's this funny, cute thing, this way to be organized, to keep your, closet together or to prepare your food a certain way. And it's like, no, not the folks that I see. They're suffering. Like, my clients are suffering.
Well, and just how debilitating it is. Like you said, it's suffering. It's not all this. And I've had a few choice interactions where you're just too stunned to just correct. So it's not your job to do that. It's their own ignorance of those 2 women. So
you're very gracious.
And it's like you're in line for the bathroom. Like, did you really expect that to happen? It's like, can I escape this? No, you can't.
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by this conference. So is this a yearly conference? And is this like a meeting of the minds? Great that you've had people with lived experiences there too, but walk us through that.
Yeah. So there are yearly conferences for clinicians. It's all clinicians from every profession, licensed professional counselors, social workers, psychologists, licensed marriage and family therapists. And on the clinician side, it is where clinicians can go and get continuing education. But then on the lived experience side, there's also really amazing support groups. And, it's just as a clinician, it's actually so refreshing to see these individuals living with the disorder enter this space, just knowing that these are their people, like that they don't have to pretend, and just feeling seen and heard. Even sometimes doing some really cool scavenger hunts where they're doing live exposure.
That's fun.
And so it's even just seeing their bravery play out in person. Yeah.
That's great. Oh my gosh. Now, let's think of the other side. So maybe folks that don't have OCD, how can someone, let's say you have a loved one that clinically diagnosed with OCD, how can you be that supportive piece for someone like that, whether you're a partner, a parent, a family member? What's that look like?
I love this question, Angela. Thank you so much for asking that. In the OCD community, we actually take family involvement quite seriously because oftentimes family members are not aware that they are engaged in enabling behaviors that we call accommodation. And to answer the question over and over for the person that has relationship OCD, do you love me? Do you think that we're going to be married forever? Have I hurt your feelings? Are you mad at me? And you're constantly like, yes, honey, of course I love you. Of course we're going to be married forever. Of course I'm not offended that you said that thing. To do that over and over is giving the individual reassurance, and it actually makes their symptoms worse. So we have to do lots and lots of psychoeducation about how to support individuals with OCD in an ERP, treatment consistent way that actually helps them get better, and how to remove accommodation and other enabling behaviors for the person that does have contamination OCD. If they don't like to take out the trash, I guess you decide to take that chore on yourself, well, then that is actually not supporting them and strengthening their skills. But it's not only that, it is also like, well, what are the supportive things that you can say? So, to say to someone that has OCD, why don't you just shake it off? Or why don't you just stop thinking about that? Or you don't have to make sure that your puppy is safe every single time. Just don't think about it. That would enrage me. Let's just start there. But it's just not very supportive. It's not that easy to just stop thinking about it. It's not that easy to just stop asking the questions. And so we give family members skills as well. We do lots of coaching of loved ones, but we also, in that coaching, we kind of hone in on, not just the behavioral side of things, so removing the accommodation, but what are the supportive things that you can say? I'm so sorry you're having a hard time. I can tell that your OCD is really questioning the health of our relationship right now. What can we say to kind of stand up to OCD, instead of giving in? And so I really love that question.
That's so interesting because I would think the accommodation, like the relational OCD, would be helpful to say, of course, but that's so interesting. But okay, noted.
The opposite.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha. So you have filled us with so much great information and just knowledge on this topic that I don't feel gets enough love as it needs to.
Thank you.
Outside of the incredible advice you've given us already, Erin, as we wrap this up, what advice do you have for listeners?
Ooh. That's such a great question. Earlier you asked a question about families paying attention to how do family members help their loved ones, right? And I would say, actually, you specifically said something about let's just say they have a diagnosis, right? How do family members help their loved ones if they know that they have a diagnosis, right? My biggest piece of advice is make sure that they get evidence-based treatment. So not every modality can address OCD. And that is a huge misconception. And so make sure that they are actually getting exposure and response prevention or acceptance and commitment therapy or inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a newer modality that's being introduced in the United States. The other thing that I would say is, please, if you see your loved one engaging in behaviors that seem out of the norm, don't just say, oh, this is just the way that they are. That's just their personality. Actually slow down and take the time to look at whether something else could be going on. Encourage them to just get some kind of therapy where they can maybe get an assessment. Because I would say that my biggest advocacy piece in my work is helping people to get assessments faster. There are these individuals that have these diagnoses. They've been officially diagnosed, but then there are people that have never gotten an assessment. And so if you are a loved one and you see your child or your spouse or your parent and they're having a hard time, really encourage them to actually go and get a diagnosis. Because if you have a diagnosis, then you can figure out how to address it through evidence-based treatment.
That's great. I mean, technology's around us. Everything you could figure out is online, but that evidence-based treatment's so important. It's such a great note to add. Erin, you have been one of my favorites. This has been an incredible episode. For those of you listening, go to the show notes, follow Erin and all the greatness that she is, and tune in again next week for another episode of That's Business.